Conservatives, exactly the same time as my colleague in Wales, Hannah Blythyn, who was also elected as a new Assembly member in Wales then. But we'll come on to our speakers in a minute. And one of the first things I said to the scrutiny teams in City Hall was I would like the Environment Committee to look into the issue of plastic. And I had lots of sucking of teeth and all Assembly member, that's not really something we've ever looked at before. It's not really something, that we can do. So it took me about 9 months to get plastic onto the agenda for the Environment Committee, which was extremely annoying, but we produced a very targeted report. I was only allowed to have one meeting on this issue. Normally if we do an investigation we have a couple of meetings. And we produced a report with some very targeted recommendations. And the only one that the Mayor of London has not fallen upon and has been implemented with enthusiasm has been setting up a deposit return scheme, obviously, because it would be quite hard to implement deposit return in London alone. Although occasionally people from London do joke about we ought to declare some sort of UDI from the rest of the country, particularly when everyone voted against Brexit. But let's not talk about Brexit too much right now. Please don't. I hear several people saying. So we produced this report, and it included things like, the whole thing about getting people away from the single-use plastic water bottles was the centre of the report, and putting in new water refill points, encouraging people to carry these when they're on the go, because there's a really big on-the-go culture in London, and trying to move everybody away from making a huge amount of mess and dropping water bottles everywhere. 75% of the flounder fish who are in the River Thames have plastic in them, and of course the plastic bottles that get into the River Thames in vast quantities. The Thames is fully tidal, has a massive tidal range going up and down. They end up in the sea, along with plastic from the rest of the world ending up in the sea. So London needs to clean up its act, and the Mayor is doing his part on that. We've got the most fantastic array of speakers. I'm really, really excited to be able to introduce them to you. We're going to try and give you some opportunity as well from the floor to raise some points, but everybody here is going to have about 5 minutes to set out the key issues as they see it. So without further ado, I am now going to call upon Sue Hayman, who is the Shadow DEFRA Secretary, who I spoke to speakers to a few times last week as well, and ask her to set out where we are on the issue of plastic, how we can tackle it from the Shadow Secretary of State position. Thank you.
Thank you, Fiona, and thank you for all your support actually for the DEFRA team for a lot of the work we've been doing. Sarah have been a really important resource and help to us, so I do appreciate that. And thank you for inviting me today to talk about this issue. It's been a whole year now, I think, since Blue Planet 2 aired on our screens. So this event today is an important and timely opportunity for our party to hold a frank discussion around the issue of plastic pollution and both the immediate and the long-term challenges that we face ahead on this. Because Blue Planet 2 was a watershed moment. This extraordinary programme was an absolute catalyst for change. Since it aired, I have been invited to many, many schools in my constituency where the children are doing projects on plastic pollution and on recycling, and that never happened before. So it's really caught the public imagination, and particularly that of our young people, which is really important. We know that the UK uses 38.5 million plastic bottles per day, and that 15 million of them are not recycled. I mean, that's an extraordinary statistics. And a staggering 700,000 plastic bottles are littered every day. So, and we also know our recycling rates are stagnating at around 44%, which makes it very unlikely we are going to hit our target of 50% by 2020. And while plastics have been in the spotlight over the last year, we must resist the urge to talk about this as a problem with just one material, or something that can be resolved through purely voluntary action. We need to work with both industry and not just consumers alone. And the government would like us to think that just because we focus on plastics, on this one material, and focus on the consumer, that this will actually help solve the problem. Actually, it's much more chronic, and the problems are much more structural than we expect consumers to sort it out. I think we we've got two choices. We can fight the battle under the existing framework, focusing on this voluntary and consumer action, or we can call for wider, meaningful, systemic change that will address basically our global waste and recycling system. It's become over-complex and we know it's not working as well as it should. And one of the biggest failings of the current recycling system is that the targets only stipulate that the material has to be collected and not what happens to it after it's been collected. And this system has evolved into a way for government to focus on targets without actually facing the underlying structural issues. And it also relies on exporting materials to parts of the world that don't have the adequate checks to make sure that the material is actually being recycled, and without any assurances that the countries will continue to accept our waste long term. We know that China decided that they would not take our recycled materials any longer. And since then, imports have been shipped instead to Malaysia, Vietnam, and Thailand, amongst others. And we know that those three countries, for example, are in the top 10 for quantities of plastic waste entering the ocean. Vietnam comes in at 4th place. I mean, to me, this is nothing short of a scandal. Public money is being funneled into companies who do nothing more than collect and export our materials from the UK to countries that have inadequate or non-existing waste and recycling infrastructure. This isn't recycling. It really isn't. This isn't actually dealing with our plastic waste. All we are doing is pushing our problem onto somebody else. And what we need to do is look at how we can tackle this at source. We know that the industry is continually producing single-use plastics at an alarming rate, with global output set to quadruple by 2050. And that's why my team are currently working on developing a radical whole system approach to resource management that tackles the root and branch issues. Some of the things we're looking at is we need to get back to the design phase. Too many products are designed at the moment without thinking about what happens at the end of that product's life. And brand owners need to invest in new technologies and new forms of packaging that are not only recyclable, but are made from recycled materials. And we need to look at production and waste minimisation rather than just recycling. We know that refuse and reuse are at the beginning of the three L's, and we need to focus more on that as well. And I'd be very keen to hear from people about ideas about how we can achieve that. And we need much more emphasis placed on producer responsibility. I'm very pleased that my colleague, Morin MP, is here at the moment, because she has got a backbench bill going forward, which is called Packaging Extended Producer Responsibility. She's gaining a lot of support for that, and I'm sure if anyone's interested, she would be happy to discuss it with people. Because the current patchwork of different recycling systems up and down the country means that many types of plastic are not even collected in households. And we need to look at a much more consistent approach. And we desperately need a regulatory and tax regime that drives the right behaviour. For example, looking at countries where virgin materials are taxed. There is a need to look at an industrial and commercial waste as municipal waste, which is where most of the focus currently lies. And that only takes up 13% of all waste. And consumers must be motivated and encouraged to recycle their plastic. And these are just a few of the principles and ideas that we're currently looking at in the Shadow DEFRA team. So if we can't or don't want to export our materials abroad, and nobody wants an incinerator in the backyard, what do we do with all our waste? That's something that we're here to discuss today, and I'm very happy to hear what everyone has to say about that. Now, just before I finish, some of you may have seen this. We have a Shadow DEFRA team and a Shadow BASE team group that have been working on how we meet our climate change targets and what kind of policies we need to bring in. We've produced this document that's been launched today called the Green Transformation across all the different departments. We've got some copies here today. I think they're at the back of the table. If you'd like to pick one up and read it, if you can't get a copy, I didn't bring another for everybody, then please let us know. We've got plenty here at the conference. Thank you.
soon, and obviously as well as the copies of the Green Transformation Report, just as you came in, and again I apologise, it's actually slightly dark there, but there is also copies of the most recent edition of the Sarah magazine, which says How Plastics Got Political, and it has a lot of information in there, including from marine scientists and so on and so forth. It's got, and on the back page it's got some quick wins, things that you can personally do. There's also a copy of the previous magazine, and also if you'd like to join Sarah, it's how to join Sarah, there's some sheets for that as well. And what I didn't say in my opening remarks, it's actually quite hard to see you because it's quite dark. So I may not actually see you put your hand up when we get to asking questions. So what might be helpful if you are on Twitter, and I've actually got hashtag #SarahPlastic ready to look at that on my phone. So if I can't see you putting your hand up, if you want to put your question on Twitter, I'll see if I can pick it up from there. Either that, or you might actually literally have to stand up. So I'm now going to introduce our next speaker, who I referred to right at the outset. Hannah Blythyn, Assembly Member in Wales, is going to talk to us as she holds the position there of Minister of Environment. Hannah.
Thank you, Leonie. Thank you very much for the opportunity to join you today to talk about the Welsh way and waste, as I like to call it. I apologise in advance if I seem to have brought the Welsh weather with me as well. I said, as the Minister for Environment, if the one thing I could sort out and control was the weather, then I think I'd be the most popular politician in the world. But no, yeah, it's very good to be here and to join you to talk about some of the things that we are doing in Wales in government. And we've got a proud record on recycling. I know recycling isn't the be-all and end-all, but it's a good starting point. And I'm proud, and I get eyes rolled in the chamber from my opposition colleagues when I say over and over again, I make no apologies for us doing well on recycling. We're number 1 in the UK, we're 2nd in Europe, and we're 3rd in the world. And we've got there, not by making headline announcements, not by knee-jerk reaction, but by actually a sensible, pragmatic, long-term approach to tackling recycling. And the way we do that, we're a small nation, we have 22 local authorities. We have a collections blueprint where we recommend to local authorities what they can do. We're the only nation in the UK where we have statutory targets for recycling, which means they cannot divert to landfill, they have to be recycled. And then we also, it's a bit of a carrot and stick situation, so we set these targets, the local authorities don't meet them, they can be fined, but also to get them there we actually provide additional support. So we faced the constraints of austerity from our colleagues at West of the UK government, it's not budget, but we've also put in sustained support for local authorities to get to the point where they can recycle, because it's a priority for us. And we've passed legislation such as the Landmark Environment Act Wales and the future generation, well-being of future generations, which means that any decisions we take now in Wales cannot have a detrimental impact for future generations. In terms of plastics, all 22 authorities currently collect plastic bottles, and 21 out of them collect plastic pots, tubs and trays, and 7 collect plastic film. We don't rest on our record, and we know we've got much more further to go. Leonie said I only came into the Assembly in 2016, and I've been a minister for a little under a year, and it's very unusual. I think it's the title of that, how plastics got political. It's very unusual to come into a policy position and into government, have this huge swathe of public opinion behind you. So knowing that it's topical, it's there, it's an agenda, and we've got all these principles and words, and for me it's actually how we take that further into practice and actually we create that change. Because I think for too long, and people who are members still know this, that the environment has almost been seen as an add-on, that fluffy issue that you only care about if everything else is sorted. But actually we know if you get it right on the environment, then it brings broader benefits for our health and well-being, for our communities and for our economy. Which is why in Wales, for me, it's actually about getting it right on the environment and we get it right for the economy as well. So we can actually, see the nail on the head in terms of you've got to look at the whole scale approach. So it's not what the focus has traditionally been on recycling, what happens at the end of the product's life, or what happens in the first place. So you'll hear lots of different opinions about the circular economy and things today, but for me in Wales, it's actually, we want to become a circular nation in terms of our economy, and it's not just about plastics, it's about actually working with those Welsh businesses to make sure we've got the infrastructure in place so when things are being recycled, they are actually being reused and that's being reprocessed within Wales and creating jobs as well. But also also it's actually about looking at the design stage. Anna's bill was absolutely right. Extended producer responsibility. The producers and the manufacturers and the retailers have a responsibility for the things that they are putting on the shelf. What happens to matter is the impact on our environment. In Wales, we've announced recently a £6.5 million fund for the circular economy, and that's working with small and medium Welsh businesses to help them lead the transition. So I want them to be able to say, well, they're actually leading the way. I think there's a public opinion there that we do need to change the way we consume, the way we make things. And I want Welsh businesses, Welsh workers to be at the forefront of driving that change. Whether that's looking at reuse and how plastics are reprocessed as well recycled content and they can reuse again, or whether we move to different products, different away from plastic. But I think we always have to be mindful, because I've been to a lot of events and people say to me, why don't you just do what Michael Gove does and say, by X date, we're going to ban all single-use plastic? And as a politician, that would be actually really easy and a very quick win for me to stand up and say, I'm going to do this, I'm going to ban single-use plastic by, say, 2021. But what I want is actually for us to do it back together and to drive that change, because I know the public wants it, and I know that when we've got that in public and politicians and children too, young people, pest the power. We've got eco schools in Wales, and they're amazing. These young people are going to meet them. I have 8-year-olds telling me what it means to be, what sustainability is and what it means to be a global citizen. And they've also got no loyalty to their parents when it comes to naming and shaming. So I sat there and viewing.
Oh, is that better? Yes. Don't worry, I'm not going to start the whole speech again. But I'm just talking about it's about the future generations and also about working with children. And that pest of power, because they have no loyalty either. So I'm at a school in Swansea and they're talking about with the children, why things go in separate collections and what it's for, and a little girl puts her hand up and says, my mummy doesn't do that. So it's about embracing the future generations, and also as for me in Wales, it's about actually how we work in partnership, because I think we all have it. I've been at so many events where people say it's the government needs to do this, consumers need to change the way they behave, the producers need to do this, the retailers need to do that. But it's actually the onus is on all of us, from grassroots to government, everybody in between. If we're going to achieve this change, and we're going to have a debate on the panel today, but actually to get there, we all need to be working collectively, and that's what we're trying to do in Wales. So, diolch yn fawr.
It sounds as though the microphones that are just in front of us are then not quite picking us up enough, so hopefully you can now hear me as well. I'm going to move straight on to Lewis Pugh, who is one of the United Nations, well, he's become the United Nations Patron of the Oceans, but he is also, if you've missed him on Twitter, he's just swum along the English Channel, and I'm really excited to have Lewis on the platform.
Thank you.
And hopefully he will be able to tell us about what he's seen and about his work as the patron of the oceans.
Thank you very, very much. It's really wonderful to be back on land again. I've spent 49 days at sea, and it was very, very interesting what I saw over those 49 days and what I didn't see over those 49 days. So just to explain, about 1,800 people have swum across the English Channel, so from Dover to Calais. I wanted to try and swim the full length of the English Channel to highlight what's happening in our ocean. So starting at Land's End and then swimming all the way to Dover. It's equivalent of 60 English channels back to back. Okay? And this swim took me 49 days. And throughout this swim, it was a swim of two parts. At the beginning, swimming past Plymouth and areas like that, it was beautiful, it was flat seas, it was absolutely magnificent. And then when we hit the Isle of Wight, from that moment onwards, it was storm after storm after storm until finally we got to Dover at the end. It was very, very interesting. At the beginning, we saw a few birds, we saw a few dolphins, we saw lots of jellyfish, which are coming as a result of the warming water and a result of overfishing, and we saw very, very little else. Very, very little else. It was quite shocking to see how little wildlife I saw along the coast, southern coast of England. Very, very little. And all the way along the beaches which I visited, there was plastic everywhere. Okay? It's not like I was swimming in a soup of plastic. but whenever I went onto a beach, there were the plastic knives and the forks, the slip-slops, the lighters, every single little piece of plastic, and you start digging amongst the sand and amongst the rocks, and there's plastic everywhere. And what we're beginning to now see around the world, so I've been swimming now for 30 years, okay, and I've swum in every single ocean of the world. What we're now beginning to see is a huge impact which plastic pollution is having on our environment. I've seen polar bears come out of the Arctic sea ice and walk onto land and walk over plastic pollution in order to go and lie down and just relax. And I have been down to South Georgia and seen the plastic pollution down at the bottom of the ocean and everywhere in between. The birds are eating it and dying, the fish are eating it and dying. We now, when we eat fish, we are now also eating plastic pollution. But what really concerns me is about how governments begin to start tackling this. Because governments are very good at tackling single issues. We've got a plastic problem, and then we attack it. Plastic, 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 and that's all we're talking about. Or we've got overfishing, and we just tackle overfishing, overfishing, overfishing. Or we tackle climate change, and we go for climate change, climate change, climate change. But what we need to do is to understand that we have now these three big things impacting the oceans, and they are causing a perfect storm. They're causing an absolute perfect storm in the oceans. As I say, I've been swimming now for 30 years. I've seen them completely change. So let me just explain how these three things are coming together to cause this perfect storm. This is a picture of the Arctic Ocean. When I was a young boy, I want you to imagine this being sea ice. When I was a young boy, that's what the sea ice was like. Okay? And I started swimming in 2005. That's what the sea ice had become. Every year it gets thinner and thinner and less and less. And I went back there last year. So in 2005, when I was swimming here on the edge of the Arctic ice, the water was 3 degrees centigrade. I went back there last year. It had shrunk even more, and the water was no longer 3 degrees centigrade. It is now 10 degrees centigrade on the edge of the Arctic ice packs. So when people talk to me about plastic pollution, I say to them, plastic is very, very serious. But you also have to understand that to the north of us is something which is happening, which will impact every single person on this planet, every single animal on this planet, and every single future generation. And when it comes to the overfishing, I have the first big swim which I did as a young boy was down here on Robben Island. I remember starting that swim. I remember looking out over that whole beach and seeing penguins everywhere, beautiful African penguins. I went back there last year and I found 2 penguins. 2 African penguins on this beach. And it's been caused by these 3 things all coming together to cause this perfect storm. Overfishing. Everyone thought that there was plentiful amounts of fish down in the South Atlantic. Climate change is now moving the sardines away, so now the penguins have to swim even further. And lastly, it's this plastic pollution. There's just been a recent study which said that if a turtle eats just one piece of plastic, it has a 20% chance of dying. 20% chance of dying if it eats just one piece of plastic. And we have now done autopsies on everything from blue whales right the way down to the smallest animal, and we are finding plastic inside their stomachs. So you can understand why there's been such this massive decline in the animal population in the world, because of these 3 things coming together. So my request to you, and you are the, thank you so much, David, you are the opposition, is to hold government to account, to really push hard and get them to understand how serious this situation and to get action for our oceans as quickly as possible. When you have these plans for 25-year plans, all I'm thinking about is the fact that when I was first in the Arctic, the water was 3 degrees, and it's now 10 degrees, and the scientists are predicting that within just 12 more years, that Arctic sea ice will be gone in the summer months. In just 12 years, the scientists are predicting that that Arctic sea ice will be gone in the summer months. So if you've got a child entering school today, when that child leaves school, they will be entering a world which is completely different to the world in which they have entered today. Completely different. The melting of the Arctic ice packs is going to impact, as I say, every single person on this planet, and especially countries like South Africa, India, the low-lying places in the world like London and New York and Hong Kong. It's going to make certain parts of the world completely uninhabitable because it'll just be too hot to live in these places. There will be increased droughts, there will be increased floods, and people are going to have to migrate simply in order to survive. And what we know is that when you have people moving, a lot of the conflicts in the world are caused because of a lack of resources. Many of the conflicts are simply a lack of resources. I'll wrap it up, Leonie, but this is really serious because when I come to the United Kingdom, all I hear is plastic, plastic, plastic. And unless this government and the opposition are tackling this, all three of them, you can win on the plastic, but you're going to lose on the climate change. And you can win on the climate change, and you're going to lose on the overfishing. That's my point.
Thank you very much.
I think Lewis has just set out very, very powerfully for us why we really need to get government on board for actually acknowledging that we need to move to a one-planet lifestyle because we do not have a second and third planet in our back pocket, and we are making this planet a very, very difficult place, not just for us to live on, but for an awful lot of other creatures that are trying very hard to live here as well. But I'm going to move straight on to Sam from Greenpeace, and we'll hear from Greenpeace now.
Thank you very much. As people may or may not be aware, Greenpeace is an organisation that has a historic relationship with ocean conservation. We're an organisation that was founded on a boat out at sea. However, people in the organisation who've been working on this issue, plastic pollution, for decades, even they have been surprised and I would say somewhat delighted by the incredible wave, pun intended, of support for tackling the plastic pollution problem. I'll be very brief. There's just 3 points I wanted to make answering this question. How does Labour lead the way in tackling the plastic pollution crisis? So the first point I think has been made very articulately by other members of the panel already, and that's accountability. So currently the plastics agenda is, to its detriment, owned by government, despite them having made, up to this point, fairly minimal substantive action. Their words are warm and they are welcomed, but without action, they're almost entirely hollow. Excuse me. And as we've seen, the government is also internally divided on their solutions, so there's no clear plan. And Labour is perfectly poised to highlight that. And also, as long as Labour doesn't prioritise waste, doesn't prioritise plastics, doesn't prioritise the circular economy, government is going to and has been getting away with looking good on this issue, despite them having delivered very little. There are significant risks of greenwashing in this space, as is already happening. Sorry, apologies. So, the second point is changing the narrative. So, I think Labour has a very crucial role to play in reframing the way we think about plastics. So, right now, a lot of the public-facing campaigns around plastics are framed through this lens of sort of littering and, the natural environment, and those things are extremely important, but they don't cut to the heart of things. The plastics pollution emergency, as Greenpeace would frame it, is not just about dirty beaches. It's about dumping barges of contaminated plastic onto already overstretched recycling systems in developing countries, and Labour's an international party. That is, something that surely can be a priority. It's about councils picking up 90% of the bill for sorting and collecting waste. And it's about producers who are lobbying the government at the highest level, not taking responsibility for cleaning up their mess, and pushing government to water down their efforts to introduce half-hearted measures, as Lewis mentioned, long-term, unclear, vague plans. And I think Labour has a really amazing opportunity to frame this for what it is, which is a social justice issue just as much as an environmental issue. And the sooner that we frame it in that way, the sooner that we'll be able to tackle it quickly and effectively. Finally, I would just say that Labour is perfectly poised to raise ambition on this issue. So we can't just settle for like-for-like substitution to items that may not be biodegradable outside of lab conditions. You have to think of the waste hierarchy. Reduction first, then reuse, then recycling. So yes, of course, we definitely need a deposit return scheme that covers containers of all materials and all sizes. Yes, that's a great first step, but we should be thinking long-term, for example, as our Welsh colleague mentioned. How can we implement statutory reduction targets? How can we use the tax system far more ambitiously than the government is even considering doing, to challenge industry, to innovate, to be better, and ultimately reduce the amount of stuff that we make? So I'll just conclude by saying that the government's stance at the moment focuses heavily on consumer action, individual items, and sort of tinkering around the edges of structural reform. Labour is perfectly poised and must be more robust in its criticism of industry and highlight their role in this, while also pointing to broader systemic issues that contribute to this problem and advocating for more fundamental and root and branch reform. And it's very comforting to hear colleagues along this table already mention that those processes are at work. That's really good to hear. So there's an amazing political opportunity here, and Labour should seize it, and that's all I'll say. Thanks very much.
Thank you very much for that, Sam. I'm going to move immediately on to David Newman, who is the Managing Director of the Bio-Based and Biodegradable Industries Association, who's going to speak to us next. David.
Thank you, and thank you for the invitation today. And I think I'm actually the oldest on this panel. Lots of grey hair, which shows that for the last 30 years I've been working on environmental questions from back in the 1980s, and it's amazing how history repeats itself, and you see the same questions coming up again and again. And Lewis highlighted this with his moving message, how everything is connected. And it's my favourite saying when I talk about these issues, that everything is connected. The first message to politicians is you've got to stop thinking in silos. And Lewis always said that. When we talk about plastics, we've got to talk about collection systems and harmonising them across the UK. How can somebody put on the label at the back of a plastic or even an aluminium can? You can collect it separately in Liverpool, but if you go over to the other side of the water there in the Wirral, then you have to put it in with your paper. But if you go down into Cheshire, then maybe you have to put it in with your glass. I mean, really, we have 400 councils and 400 collection systems. I don't know anywhere more confused than that. Food waste. We're not going to resolve the problem around plastics unless we resolve the problem around food waste, because plastics contaminate much of our food waste, and food contaminates much of our plastics. So we have to separate them out if we want to get them cleanly into collection systems. We have to talk about eliminating, banning, God damn it, banning materials that are difficult to recycle. We banned lead in petrol, the world was going to come to an end if we banned lead in petrol. Well, hang on, we're still here today. We banned asbestos. Oh, God, every building's going to burn down if we ban asbestos. Oh, what a miracle. Here we are today and we're still alive. Yes, you can ban a lot of things, just tell with it banned. The third message is we've got to get the economics right. All these systems revolve around money. They don't revolve around good intentions, voluntary agreements, industry making a plastics pact. We are signatories like Greenpeace to the Plastics Pact, which is in course at the moment. we do have very, very severe doubts about the tokenism of voluntary agreements and about buying time for industry to carry on doing the same things that it's been doing for the last 50 years. The second key message this morning is one around transparency. The data came out just last week. We put 2.25 million tonnes of plastic packaging onto the market in the UK last year. And if you look at the Recoup's report, Recoup is the Plastic Recycling Association, there's a lot of great data in there. And I'm going to just shout out some numbers. Now hold up your hands if you think this is the real recycling rate for plastics packaging in the UK. 15%. 34%. 43%. 66%. Well, there's not many people held up their hands, so either you don't know very much or you're not convinced about any of the data. But the data is very confusing. Actually, it's about 9%. Okay, 15% is collected and sent to recycling in the UK. About 9% is actually recycled. What really happens to our plastic waste, as been told to you before, it's shipped off somewhere either to be burned or to some third world country, which maybe gets a little bit of value out of it. And the problem with plastic waste is it's actually worthless. There's only one or two very small streams of plastics that have any value at all. So it's no wonder we're not collecting it, no wonder we're not recycling it, no wonder it has no value. But there's a lot of defensive decisions out there. A lot of the trade associations supporting the plastics industry are putting out messages like, yeah, well, you know, the alternatives, they're just as bad. We're doing our best, we'll do more recycling. They've been saying this for the last 50 years. You have to ask the right questions to get the truth and to get to the right data. The third key message is innovation is unstoppable. If you ask Henry Ford said, if you ask the public when I put the Model T on the market, what they would like to be able to get around faster, they would have said bigger horses. Because people don't think of the future. People don't. Oops, the microphone has gone dead. And people don't think about what innovation can bring. But compostable materials, the companies that I represent, the materials that biodegrade down into earth, essentially, are here. They're here now. They're here all over the world. So let's stop being in denial. Multinational brands are embracing them. The Co-op just announced yesterday that shopping bags in their stores across the UK are all going to be compostable. Waitrose have just announced all the food and vegetable bags that you buy your fruit and vegetables in are going to be compostable. Brands are going towards compostable materials because they know there is a route to recycling for these. Why aren't we doing this in the UK? Well, we're beginning to a little bit. But at the moment we're importing shed loads of plastic we can't recycle from China and sending it back to Vietnam and saying, hey, that's good, we've resolved the problem. We can actually be making those materials here, treating those materials here, composting those materials here, improving our economy, improving our environment. Fourth message, infrastructure. Dave Lewis, the CEO of Tesco, wrote to me to say the UK waste management system is unfit for purpose. I don't really need to add too much to that, except to say it ain't so difficult to get it right. We don't have to reinvent the wheel. I'll take you on a field trip to Belgium, Netherlands, Denmark, Sweden, Finland, Norway, Austria, Northern Italy, California, for examples of where they're doing it right. Not perfectly, but far, far better than we're doing it. 2 minutes. We need a 3-bin collection system. Packaging waste paid for by the packaging industry, food waste and garden waste paid for by us through our council tax, and non-recyclable waste which can go to incineration or whatever. Joined up thinking. That's what the Labour Party can do. Make sure that it's joined up thinking, which takes into account the oceans, which takes into account food waste, which takes into account climate change. If we think in silos, we're going to be in the hands of the plastics industry for the next 50 years.
Thank you.
Right, I'm drawing our really interesting speakers to a close because I'm sure you're going to have some questions as well. But last but very much not least is John Higginson from A Plastic Planet. So we'll move straight on to John.
Great. Thank you very much, and thank you for having me. Our campaign, A Plastic Planet, is the one that we've got a very simple message. We have a campaign for plastic-free aisles in supermarkets because what we found is when you wanted to do something, it was actually very hard to do so because you go to a supermarket and you try to buy something plastic-free and everything is covered in plastic. So we actually think that there's lots of great ideas here, and we think it's great that that Wales is looking into better ways of recycling and everything else, but we think the answer is really simple. Let's stop using so much plastic. Let's put far more effort into turning off the tap of plastic. We think plastic should not be used in food and drink, and that's why our campaign has really taken hold, because actually people want to go in their supermarket, they want to buy things that aren't made out of plastic, they want to have a plastic-free aisle where they know that when they buy those things, they don't have to think about the other end, because actually you have to think about the human element of things. And no matter how good a council gets at recycling, there's always going to be people that just don't put it into the right bin, can't fit 3 bins into their kitchen. When you're out and about drinking a bottle of Coke or you buy a Pret sandwich and it's got a little plastic window on it, there's nothing you can do with that when you're out and about, because you're never next to a recycling bin. You'd never be able to put enough about. So we just need to be using less. I mean, we're not pushing for any particular material. Paper, cardboard, aluminium, steel, all these things are good. New biomaterials now that break down in not just heavy compostable ways, but in simple people's garden. There are so many other alternatives out there that we shouldn't just be thinking, how do we get this circular economy? And our view is that the plastics industry would love us to be thinking about the circular economy. How do we do this? Because it puts all the onus on us as consumers. We need to be doing more. How can we be doing more? When actually, if you could walk into a shop and you could buy something you want and it didn't have plastic around it, you can suddenly forget about that. You can put it in a bin, it breaks down, it should be out of natural materials. And that's really the case that we're making, and that's a case that's really work with people, because that's what people want to do, and that's what we think should be the right way, especially on food and drink, because food and drink is something that goes so quickly, and plastic lasts for 500 years, and we shouldn't be having to think of a way to do it. As David said, when you recycle, and even if we doubled our recycling rates, as David said, 9% recycling, that'd be 20% of stuff that gets recycled. Often it gets downcycled, it doesn't get remade back into another bottle that's really useful, it gets made into something far less useful. So that's the case that we're standing on and I'm making there. Thank you.
So we've got almost half an hour now for you to put your questions to the panel, and I think it would probably be helpful if you indicate if there's a specific person that you would like to answer your question. I've already seen one hand right at the back, I think. So if you want to stand up and say your question, that would be really helpful.
The food supermarkets have imposed food packaging on us in order to simplify their logistics and storage. Is there a way to follow the food and trade principle and impose the costs of dealing with plastic back on the food industry and on the workforce?
Okay, and I've seen another hand here. Do you want to stand up as well? Because you haven't got the microphone, so I think people will hear you more easily.
For Sue Hayman, can we consider existing buildings as assets that need to be considered for reuse before demolition is given in the planning process?
Okay, that's probably going into a slightly different area, but we'll see. And did you want to say something as well? Did you put your hand? Yeah, do you want to stand up so that?
Is there a microphone, or can you hear me?
Well, you can I think we can hear you, but I think you do need to stand up, that's all.
Yeah. I think there's, well, first of all, Jane Green, been here for quite a few years. I mean, I'm afraid I'm going to be political. How plastics got political, and I think it's very urgent that we do make it political. I think generally recycling and resources have been seen as something where we campaign on it, we petition the government to do it. Whereas Labour does have a very distinctive approach, and you can see that from Wales, where in terms of plastic bottles...
Jane, I don't like to draw you to a close, but is there a question in there?
Okay, there is a question there. How can we actually get those policies clarified and make sure that the public know about it? We've got all these brilliant policies, and quite a lot of them are distinctly Labour, and what I'd like to suggest is, I suppose the question to Sue Hayman is, how can all the group that's working in the shadow DEFRA, how can we link up and
I am going to draw you to a close. How can we communicate our policies more effectively? Is Jane's question. I've decided. And I've just seen another hand over here. Sorry. Can you be brief?
Yes. What we do in the UK is all very well, but the average punter in the UK is not going to do very much until we see that other countries of the world doing the same. To Hayman briefly, what should we be doing as a country, and our leaders particularly, to encourage China, India, all these other places to minimise the amount of plastic they produce? Final question. Comment is, fossil fuel is the raw material for plastic. Does it cross-subsidise?
Okay. I think I probably am going to slightly rule out the question about buildings and seeing buildings as assets, because I don't really think that's within Sue's brief. And I'm going to start by asking that set of questions, and then I'll come back and take another group of questions. But I am going to start with Sue. The food industry, can we make it play? How do we communicate our policies more effectively? Start first.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's a really good question about the food to waste principle and it going back to food manufacturers and packaging. It's something that we are looking at within the Shadow Teffer team as to how do you effectively work with manufacturers of plastic or other unsuitable packaging, to be honest, to reduce the amount of packaging that we have and to make what packaging is there properly recyclable. It's something that we could perhaps do within the tax system, for example. One thing we're doing, people talked about silos. Can I just say, we are not working in silos on the environment. We've set up this Shadow Cabinet subcommittee, which is chaired by me and Rebecca Long-Bailey, but we are bringing in people from all the other departments, and this booklet is the outcome of that. And we're also looking at a food manifesto and working on that, and that will also have a section on packaging in order to specifically look at this issue, because it is really, really important. Getting policies out into the public, we do our best, we really do, but it all depends on what the media wants to pick up at the end of the day as to what the public gets shoved in front of them. Now, I've actually been going around the country doing environment round tables. I was in Bristol last week doing it, talking to people. These are public meetings, they're not just party meetings, to talk about what we are looking to work on and to get feedback on our policies as well. And I will continue to do that. And in fact, conferences like this are a good way to try and get the media to take more interest. I've done something locally as well on this morning. So it's a difficult one if the media thinks that education and health and the economy are the sexy subjects of the day. But we all need to start talking much more about the environment. It needs to be much more central to what we do, and I'll just keep pushing it.
Yeah, specifically on the extended producer responsibility, the UK packaging industry pays in 10% of the contributions which European equivalent countries pay into their collection and treatment systems for their packaging waste. 10%. Now the government's announced in EU policy reforms this year make it obligatory for the packaging industry by 2023 to pay the full cost of collection and treatment, and that will mean theoretically 9 times, 10 times more than they are paying now. And this is why the industry is of course resisting change very, very heavily, because it's all a question of economics. They will be paying, instead of the £80 million now, close to £1 billion by 2023 to councils to pick up and collect and treat their packaging waste. That's what we want to see, and then we will resolve a lot of these problems.
Yeah, onto the, I think it's quite a fundamental point, the point about producer responsibility. So, as David has mentioned, industry is lobbying very hard to get the government to frame this around, there'll be different levels of information around this, but we have a system called the Packaging Recovery Note system in the UK, and the industry is lobbying government to frame our waste and resources strategy around reform of the PRN system. We'll just tinker around the edges, we'll just make it better, we'll even out, make it less incentivised for exports to go overseas, and sort of piecemeal measures. Again, we have models across Europe of how producers can pay far more, contribute what they should be paying, Greenpeace would argue, to clean up their mess. There is no reason why we shouldn't be exploring those options. Clearly, your colleague in Labour, Anna McMorrin, who's produced this bill about extended producer responsibility, again, very encouraging, because that is how the conversation needs to be framed. On the issue of how does Labour communicate what it's doing, well, I think up to this point, I think it's been a question of narrative ownership. So I think now, with things like this document, with things like this panel, Labour has an opportunity to take the ball and run with it and get the government to be far more ambitious on its plastics agenda. You know, it can't just be individual members with individual sort of interesting and useful projects. It has to be party-wide agreement. Oh yeah, of course. Sorry, yeah, thank you. Yeah, of course. Yeah, very briefly. So I think again that question of global influence. So I think people will have seen that article that came out a little while ago about how the majority of plastic comes from 9 rivers in developing nations. Well, we have a very fundamental role to play in reducing that plastic waste that comes from those rivers, because a lot of that waste is exported by us. So we need to think very long and hard about taking responsibility for that waste, both the producers do and we in terms of our waste management system. We can show leadership in a number of ways, not just on waste exports, but also taking radical action through the tax system, and taking a radical reduction agenda that can lead and set an example for countries where their infrastructure may not be as developed as ours is, even though the caveat of that is, of course, even our infrastructure is not as developed as it could be compared to other European countries. So it's about leadership, basically. We should set the example.
Thank you. We led in 2008, it's 10 years since the Climate Change Act was introduced under Labour, and I'm confident that if we have another Labour government, that we will be able to show much more global leadership than we've seen under the coalition of the Tories. But Hannah is showing leadership in Wales.
Thank you. As I said, just actually mentioned the leadership first of all, and I think you're absolutely right. There is a need for us globally to take responsibility. But I think likewise, we have a responsibility to be leaders and to set the precedent on that as well. And Wales may only be a small country, but I'd like to say we've got big ambitions when it comes to our environment. And you hit the nail on the head at the start, and Greenpeace, that actually the environment is a social justice issue. So like I said, if we get it right on the environment, it has so many other broader benefits, and I think that's how we need to message it. I think in terms of the Labour movement, then perhaps people like me work more closely with people like Sue to have that collective message about actually why it's a social justice issue and why we need to get it right on the environment.
Do you guys want to come in?
I just like to answer that point that you've partly looked at now, leading by example. I think that's absolutely right. And actually, wouldn't it be great, because we've been so behind on so many environmental issues, and I know Lewis is saying, well, actually, climate change, overfishing are just as important issues, but we're talking about plastics now. Wouldn't it be great if Britain was the leader when it came to plastics? And actually, some of the countries that you're talking about, third world countries, Mumbai banned plastic bags overnight. I think Kenya just a couple of weeks ago did a massive ban. So some of the countries that are really leading on plastics are third world countries, and where this pollution is coming from that was identified in the Greenpeace report. So we shouldn't just think, oh, what about the third world, what about China, and sit back. It'd be great if we lead, but they're being really good as well. In what areas? Anything else?
I'll just talk about India, because it's where I'm involved with the world's largest beach cleanup. So for those of you who've been to Mumbai, you'll know it's a very, very busy city, enormous population. And there was a young man there called Afroz Shah, who every morning he'd wake up, he'd look out across his beach, and he'd just see more and more and more plastic pollution coming onto his beach. And so he decided to go down to that beach and start cleaning it up. And he was joined by another person the following weekend, and then the following weekend there were 4 people, and then 6 people, and then 8 people. And he's been cleaning that beach now, together with a group of 1,000 volunteers, and he's been cleaning it for 2.5, coming up to 3 years. And he cleans it on the weekend, they clean it every weekend, volunteers coming down from across Mumbai to clean this beach. And in the middle of the week, then that ocean just vomits up more and more and more plastic. But he's now got it to a stage where now finally, after so many years of this plastic pollution, and when I arrived there, that plastic pollution was shoulder height. Shoulder height. Okay? And this all started in 1998. Okay? In 1998, there was a massive development in India, and there was, the growth of the economy, and you go down that beach now, and you just see everything. I once picked up over 600 flip-flops in just 10 square meters. Over 600 flip-flops in just 10 square meters. But now, after all this cleanup, now eventually this year we started seeing some turtles coming ashore and laying their eggs. So it just shows what can be done by ordinary members of the public feeling passionate about issues. People talking about this being a social justice issue. Yes, it is. But it's also, for me, it's always been a fight about justice. Justice between us and the animal kingdom. There's something very, very wrong about us damaging the environment in such a way that we're literally killing off animals and not leaving our children with a world in which they have any sustainable future.
Okay, I'm now going to try and squeeze in another round of questions, but I am conscious if you are delegates in the conference, some of you may need to leave. I've seen someone there, and then a lady over here, and there's a lady at the back, and then that will be the four. Okay, so I'll take you first.
I'm a cabinet member for Countries Against the Environment and Legal Next. What we're finding, we're one of the councils that collects the widest range of plastic that we can collect. If you see the BBC article a couple of days ago, what we find though is that with all these different regimes, will the government commit to standardising that regime to make it easier? But the other issue we're finding as well is the confusion with the labelling on the packaging. So will we commit to standardising that packaging, make it a lot simpler for consumers?
Right, standardisation and labelling. I saw you next.
I think my question's for Sue, Hannah, and Leonie. I wanted to argue, the Labour Party on a deposit return scheme, so obviously it's a very good principle, but in terms of how it being put into practice, we should know what the Labour view on that is.
So, DRS, deposit return scheme, what's the Labour view?
I'm a councillor for Hastings, and we passed a motion in May trying to reduce single-use plastics. And as far as I can see, very little has changed. We no longer have plastic cups in the council building, but that's it. So last weekend we had the Seafood and Wine Festival. There was just a sea of plastics, and obviously we're by the beach. It's heartbreaking. I'm now chairing an overview and scrutiny on trying to reduce single-use plastics. And I just wanted to ask, in this sort of age of austerity where everything is being cut, in our council we're looking at how to create income. So we're going to set up this renewable energies company that we produce renewable energy at a low cost for local people, people with social housing prioritised. So what can I do as a councillor to reduce single-use plastics? And is there some sort of income generation idea that you have that we can do in terms of recycling that the council can use to generate income off the back of these plastics as well?
Okay, and did I see someone else? Yes, over here.
It's not really a question. I agree with the Isle of Wight. It's more of an invite to Sue. You're saying you're doing group roundtable.
So I got invited last night to the Isle of Wight.
You're very active in the Isle of Wight. I might as well take it. So you're aware of Ellen MacArthur Foundation?
Yes, I am.
Thanks, because I love her there as well. So
Okay.
we make that happen.
Yeah, well, I'm in discussions.
Ellen MacArthur Foundation have been working very much in this space, and are the ones who, Ellen came out with the iconic statement, which I think also made people sit up and take notice, which is by 2050 there will be more plastic in the oceans than fish. And I think we've just heard a lot of testimony from Lewis about exactly how we're on that journey towards that. I'm going to give Sue the microphone, because I think a lot of those questions were aimed towards her.
Thanks for the Isle of Wight. Hopefully I'll see you soon. Right, what have we got? Carrot chase, standardising the regime around councils. Again, what we're doing at the moment in the Shadow Deputy team, we're actually in the process of developing our waste strategy and our proposals and our policy around that. And one of the things that we are looking at is the fact that right across the country, as David said earlier, we have so many, every council does it differently. Some do it very, very well, some do it not so well.
And one of the things that we're looking at is how Wales does it, because Wales does it much more effectively than we do here. So I'd be really happy to have a meeting with you. We can work together like you suggested. I think that we should very much be looking at standardising regimes. Difficulty we have is it's going to be really, really complex, and how do we do it because of the length of contracts that exist, and how do we bring them back in, and what we do. But just to say that it is something that we have an ambition towards, and it's something we need to work out what would be the most effective way to do that, and what would it cost as well, because obviously we have to get everything costed up and signed off with the Treasury. Labelling on packaging is something that actually we're actively looking at the moment. We had an animal welfare consultation earlier this year, and labelling for food was one of the things that we consulted on, but clearly we're looking genuinely at how you label any kind of product in order that the consumer has all the information in front of them that they need before they purchase anything, and that's important for all packaging. The DRS scheme, the deposit scheme, it was in our manifesto that we would bring one in. We stand by that. What we've been doing is talking to different business groups about the most effective way to do that. One of the issues that we're trying to resolve is what does it mean for small shops, because what we don't want is for small shops to say we can't do this because of health and safety, where we store it, etc., which then means that we push business towards the bigger retailers like the big supermarkets at the expense of small shopkeepers. So we're trying to work out how to do that, but it works well in a number of European countries, so we're looking at different examples and where we would go. That's probably me. I'll pass somebody else on to talk about income generation.
Well, I was just going to very briefly say, because you posed it at me as well, DRS, deposit return schemes, we asked that the Mayor should introduce that, and he felt he couldn't in London alone, but he and his officials have obviously had meetings with Michael Gove, and in the lead up to those meetings went through some of that, and then Michael Gove has even come out and said that is something the government is looking at. Now I want them to introduce it as soon as possible, not just do endless consultations or say let's have plastic-free aisles in supermarkets in 2045 or some nonsense like this. We need to be getting a wriggle on with these things. We've done separate reports in London on standardisation and labelling, and one of the real problems with plastic, I've got friends who tried to recycle tea bags, and that was of course when they were, or actually put them in compost, thinking that they'd be broken down. Of course they cannot be broken down because even the tea bags have got plastic in them now in many cases. And the manufacturers say that things like baby wipes and wet wipes, and some of them are still marked as flushable. No, do not put them down the toilet. They are also full of plastic. They gather together with fat down the toilet, in the sewers, where I've actually been and seen this. I've been working with Thames Water a lot, and create fatbergs, which we then spend millions of pounds trying to clear all this thing out of the system. So, have a good look at how plastic's got political. It's got some things that you can individually just do a checklist of things that you're doing in your life. Eradicate as much plastic from your life as you can, and yes, we definitely need better labelling so we know exactly where it is. Sorry about that, it was a bit of a rant from me.
Ranting for the share.
As my wife knows, when we talk about plastics, I rant all the time, so it's nice to hear somebody else doing it. The message for you in Hastings is, listen, plastics are worthless. Waste plastic is worthless. Why are plastics so successful? They're cheap. Therefore, ergo, plastic waste is worthless. There's only really two streams of plastic waste you have any value. What you as a council can save on is actually sending plastics to disposal. That's costing you £100, £120 a tonne every time you do that. If you follow the plastics free R, you follow the plastics planet philosophy, wipe out a lot of the single-use plastics that you possibly can, and therefore you reduce the amount you have to collect, reduce the amount you have to send to landfill incineration, and this will save you money. But wait until the EPR reform comes through, and then you will have far, far more resources to do this, and fight politically for that reform to be really, really stringent.
Very briefly. Just on the issue of deposit return scheme, I would just make a very brief appeal to both the politicians sat at this table and people around the room to be very conscious of the fact that the government is being led by industry to water down proposals for a deposit return scheme to be limited to what they refer to as on-the-go products, so that will be bottles of limited size, maximum around 500 millilitres, or only certain materials, or an industry is lobbying extremely hard. We're talking about very heavy hitters lobbying the highest levels of government to water down deposit return scheme. So you, as people who care about plastics, if you hear the phrase on the go when it comes to deposit return scheme, get nervous and get, focus in on that, because that is a way via which government is going to wriggle out of a good deposit return scheme. And if we have a bad one, that could cause it to die. So be very aware of that.
So I'm just going to bring in Hannah on the issue of standardisation, but can I just draw your attention to the rest of the CERA programme? Obviously it's not all on plastics at all. The next one that we're doing is on clean air and a clean energy revolution, which you might want to attend if you're interested in clean energy issues. After that, we're talking about, do you have an appetite for healthy and sustainable food? Because one of the things that we've really recognised is that we've got an unsustainable system of delivering food to us, not just in this country but around the world. If you want to hear about the Climate Change Act, and from a lot of fantastic speakers, we're having a rally, do grab one of these. It gives you a whole list of all the areas that we're looking at over the course of the conference. I wanted to just say that because I know some of you are just about to go. Hannah.
Thank you. I'll try and keep it as brief as possible. On standardisation and local authorities, I mentioned a moment ago we've got something called the collections blueprint in Wales, which is essentially the government's recommendation of the best way to do things, which is separate waste collection. Getting up to about 2/3 of local authorities do it that way now. There's that kind of the balance between basically respecting local sovereignty and saying this is the best way to do it. The incentivisation for us is we've got something called the Collaborative Change Programme, which is additional funding for local authorities, and that's targeted to the local authorities that are following that collections blueprint, so it's kind of how you incentivise the change as well, and actually we've seen it, we're all moving in that direction. So I'm going to very briefly come in on DRS. DRS is the popular thing at the moment, and I think we should be wary of anything that solves the panacea to the problem. I think it could help. For us, we've been working with our counterparts in Scotland and at the UK level too, because to make a system that works for us in Wales, we don't have a cross-border problem. But for us, it's making sure it works alongside what we're already doing in terms of curbside collection. So a lot of I've spoken to European counterparts, and a lot of the countries where they've got it already, they do not have curbside collection, so you take your recycling to a recycling plate centre. So what I don't want to see in Wales is people that, you've seen that cultural change and they're already doing quite well, but then to think, well, why am I now having to go in elsewhere and do it? Why am I paying that tax to make sure it fits with the system we've already got and actually helps to take us where we want to go rather than takes us back as well? I just want to say to Hastings, don't do yourself down saying it's only within council we stopped using single-use plastic. Well, actually it starts there, doesn't it? Because we have to get our own house in order first. So let's always practice what we preach as well.
Can I just thank the person for raising the question on labelling and how confusing it is. At A Plastic Planet, we've actually identified that issue and come up with a label that's really simple. It says plastic free, and it goes front of pack. We've already been working with Iceland on this, and 2 weeks ago they came out with plastic-free banana wraps, because people, I know you might say, well, bananas come in their own packaging, but actually lots of people like buying their bananas in bags. And by wrapping their bananas in a material that says plastic-free right on the front there, that's going to save 50 million tonnes of plastic from going to landfill. We're working with a number of other organisations, such as TPIGS, because some of the materials, for instance, as has been identified, there's plastic inside most tea bags. The plastic is lines inside of tins that most people don't know about, and it doesn't need to be there. It only needs to be there for tomatoes, which are acidic, but everything else, it doesn't need to be there. The tin is enough, but they line it with plastic just because it's easier to do so. So actually consumers don't actually know if they've got something that's plastic free or not. So it serves two purposes having this. And Sue, we'd love to meet with you because we're meeting with DEFRA next week about this. It serves two purposes. It tells the consumer right from the start, right there, without them having to look to the back of the pack and take longer on their shop. This is plastic free, I can put it in there. But at the end of its life, they then know where to put that, because if it's a biomaterial that looks like plastic, that saves them putting it into recycling, where it can cause problems, and they put it in compostables or do something else with it. So that's what we believe is the answer to this kind of soup of different labels. Thank you.
Thank you. So I'm going to draw it to a close. I'd like to thank all of our speakers. I'm sure you'd like to join with me in doing so in the traditional way. For those stimulating questions, I'm sorry that there are a couple of people who put their hands up. If there's any food left, I am also very interested in making sure there's no waste. So I'd like you to finish the food and finish any food and drink that's left. And thank you so much for coming. Do join CERA. If you're interested in environmental issues, you can join online and do look at the rest of our programme of meetings. This is just the first, and we've got quite a range of things that we'll be discussing. Thank you so much for coming.